Welcome, my friends, to your set of videos for Unit 2. Make sure you understand what your video homework type is, and I'll see you at the end of the notes. Wow, this is Unit 2. Oh my gosh, You're about to embark on Unit 2 videos with Miss I. Get ready, cause it's gonna be awkward and... Alrighty, my friends, welcome to your first video for Unit 2. Please make sure that you understand what your homework is for this video. Also, as a little side note, I am recording this outside, so please excuse any outdoor noise for today. And our topic is the fall of the Persian empires. So our objectives, what are we going to get out of this? Number one, and this is our unit question. How could you determine that something is classical? Number two, how does respect correlate with ruling an empire? And number three, what makes a ruler great? Let's go ahead and get started. Looking at the Achaemenid commonwealth. So roads and administration machinery. This enabled the empire to govern a vast empire and extend Persian influence all throughout their territories, as you can see here on the map. As I explained last time, these little mini sections are kind of like provinces or states that were divided up just to make sure that the Persians could actually keep everything control and make sure that the empire was good to go. Another aspect of this that we need to look at is the political stability. It was possible to undertake the extensive public works projects of this ginormous empire because the political realm was pretty good during this time. And an example of a public works project that was undergoing is Qanat, I believe that's how you pronounce that, or underground canals that look like this right here. And this led to enhanced agricultural production. More food equals more population growth. And these are essentially how the canals would work, right? You have the actual canal right down here accessing some source of water, and this canal is essentially going to the various irrigated areas. And this was incredibly helpful, useful, and needed, right, for the Persian Empire that essentially took all of the Middle East during this time. Another aspect to look at is iron metallurgy, right? This spread to all parts of the empire, and the iron tools were so common that they were starting to be used in agricultural communities, which once again helped create food, which helped the population boom. Peoples in the various regions of the empire maintained their ethnic identities, but all participated in larger Persian commonwealth. And what I mean by the commonwealth, I'll give you two different definitions. The first is a political community founded for the common good. That's just kind of like a blanket statement. Another term that you could use to describe a commonwealth is a republic, not a democracy necessarily, because a democracy means that the people have a say in what the government is doing, but a republic has various representatives to help out and encourage public opinion being noticed within the government. Eventually, there are difficulties between the rulers and the subject peoples that undermined the integrity of the empire. Going back to Cyrus and Darius, if you forget, they're right over here. They both consciously pursued a policy of toleration in administering their vast multicultural empire. They took care to respect the values and cultural traditions of the peoples they ruled. So, for example, when Darius was in power, he won the high praise from the Jewish population in the Achaemenid Empire, since he allowed them to return to Jerusalem to rebuild a temple that the Babylonian conquerors had destroyed previously in 587 BCE. And he essentially kind of let them continue to practice their own religions as well. Darius's successor, however, his son, Xerxes, pictured right here, or a little bit more detailed right there, had a more difficult relation with his subject peoples. He started to rule right after his father died from 486 to 465 BCE, and he essentially saw a lot of burden from Mesopotamia and Egypt. The reason being is that these regions were incredibly sophisticated. They had a pretty rich cultural traditions and long histories of independence. So a lot of the peoples in these areas would frequently rise up in rebellion against Xerxes. And he would harshly repress these rebellions, and he essentially gained a reputation for cruelty and insensitivity to the concerns of the subject peoples as opposed to his father and great-grandfather. Also, if the name Xerxes seems familiar, if you've ever seen the movie 300, that's him in the movie. It's not the true representation of what he looked like, not very historically accurate, so we're just going to go ahead and move on from that. And we're going to look at the Persian Wars. The Achaemenids had an especially difficult time with their ethnic Greek subjects. These Greek subjects mainly inhabited the cities in Anatolia, that is shown right here on your map, and they would have been the areas that are in the green to the eastern side, not necessarily to the western side, to the eastern side. They maintained close economic and commercial ties with their cousins in the peninsula of Greece, which is the western side of this map. The Ionian Greeks, Ionian being that the western half of this map Greeks, hence they're right next to the Ionian Sea, fell under Persian domination during the reigns of Cyrus. When Darius came under rule, these Greeks essentially were starting to resist the Persian governors as much as possible. The Persians saw them as a part of their community. The Greeks saw them as tyrants. Depends on your perspective, right? In 500 BCE, the Ionian cities rebelled, expelled, or executed their governors and asserted their independence from the Persians. And soon, right afterwards, you have these set of wars called the Persian Wars, which lasted for about 20 years. Here's just another map showcasing the Persian Wars for you, where it started, where it particularly was hit, etc. And this is going a lot into depth, or is going into a portion of Greek history that we're going to get onto later in these videos, but it is necessary to talk about the Greeks, even though we're talking about the end of the Persian empires. So let's look at the Ionian Greeks versus the Persians. Essentially, these Persian wars expanded from Anatolia to the Ionian section when the Greeks from the Ionian section, the western side of Greece, sent fleets to aid their kinsmen from all over the Greek area. So when Darius had to take over and fight these wars, he managed to put down the rebellion and reassert his kingdom's authority. But his successors later on had an incredibly difficult time trying to quell down these rebellions and ultimately destroyed their hopes of wanting to extend any authority into the Greek peninsula. In 490 BCE, Darius attempted to forestall future problems by mounting an expedition to conquer the wealthy Greek cities and absorb them into his empire. It was incredibly difficult for him, but he was ultimately successful. But when his son came into power, he attempted to have another expedition 10 years later, but he suffered way too many defeats. He ultimately was not his father, and he had to abandon the hopes of grabbing any more Greek territory and return back to Persia. So another layer to the downfall of the Persian Empire was with a man named Alexander of Macedon. And the Persian Wars ended the standoff with the rise of, once again, Alexander of Macedon, otherwise known as Alexander the Great. In 334 BCE, Alexander invaded Persia with an army of some 48,000 tough battle-hardened Macedonians. It was an incredibly small army compared to the Persians, but they were very well disciplined. And they carried heavier arms and employed more sophisticated military tactics than the Persians, which ultimately led, 3 years later, and led to Alexander completely shattering the Achaemenid forces. And within a year, the empire that was founded by Cyrus the Great had completely been dissolved and under the control of Alexander the Great. And I don't know if you can see in this map right here, but this is the relationship between Macedon, Greece, and Persia. So Macedon is right above ancient Greece. And they're essentially just seeing what is happening between the Persians and the Greeks. And slowly but surely, Alexander said, hey, I want to try to grab this weakened empire and see what happens. And he was incredibly successful. Alexander led his forces into Persepolis, which was the capital of the Persian Empire at this time. He confiscated all of the wealth that was stored. He paid, interestingly enough, he paid his respects to the tomb of Cyrus. And then afterwards, he proclaimed himself heir to the Persian rulers. There was a brief moment of celebration, which led to his forces igniting a huge fire, which set the capital on fire. Some people think it was on purpose, some people think it was an accident. Who knows? Even though the Achaemenid Empire had crumbled, its legacy was by no means exhausted. Alexander portrayed himself in Persia and Egypt as a legitimate successor of the Achaemenids, who observed their precedents and deserved their honors. He retained the Achaemenid administrative structure, and he confirmed the appointments of many satraps and other officials. So even though Alexander came in to conquer this area, he pretty much kept the same structure, at least government structure, that was happening before his time, because he knew that it was incredibly successful. But unfortunately, he had very little time to enjoy his conquest because he died in 323 BCE after a brief effort to try to extend his empire well into India. He was a little bit successful in getting some land in India, but we're going to actually look at Alexander the Great more so when we talk about ancient Greece, because he has more of an impact there, I think. And that is where we will end things off for today. So what did we learn? In the case of Persia, classical can be seen by the sophisticated political systems. Having the respect of subject peoples is incredibly important if a ruler wants to rule successfully. And then lastly, a great ruler needs to have a multitude of different attributes, but they mainly need to be respectful of different cultures, religions, and laws. That was some pretty inspirational stuff, right? Make sure that you understand what your homework type is. And if you have any questions, you know exactly how to reach me. Goodbye, good luck, and I'll see you next time.